How do we avoid burnout in ministry? Many of us are so used to going at 90 miles an hour, firing on all cylinders 24/7, and rarely looking out for ourselves. But if we're honest, most of us know that we can't keep that up. And good student ministry isn't a blink and you'll miss it sort of thing. So, how do we do good ministry, but also do our best to last for the long haul? On this episode, we'll get into that and so much more with our guest. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection. Welcome again to Student Ministry Connection, a podcast for those who serve in student ministry, want to connect, and have a desire to grow. My name is Steve Cullum, and today we're bringing back James Sabin, a guest from episode 34 of the podcast, where at that time he talked about his own burnout story and how to overcome burnout. Today, with that season behind him, James talks about avoiding burnout, the importance of rhythms, why we should stay connected, and so much more. But before we jump into all that, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this episode of the podcast. G-Shades is a youth ministry curriculum and teaching strategy focused on helping students see everyday life situations through the lens of the gospel. G-Shades has options to fit everyone as well, with 3 plans to choose from. This curriculum gives you the resources that you need to do what you do better. Do you need message outlines, a discussion guide, and a game? That's just $20 a month. If you're looking for a higher production value, including bumper videos, Instagram devotionals, and parent guides, that's $30 a month. And if you want an affordable, engaging video curriculum, G-Shades has you covered for only $40 a month. You will not find a better youth ministry video curriculum at that price point anywhere. Head over to gshades.org, that's gshades.org, to download Season 4 of G-Shades curriculum and use the promo code CONNECTION at checkout to receive an extra $20 off your order. G-Shades, seeing life through the lens of the gospel. Thank you, G-Shades, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can find the link to G-Shades in the podcast show notes. Right now, I just want to encourage you to take a deep breath, hold it for a couple seconds, and then breathe out. Then I want you to actually pause this podcast for just a moment and say a quick prayer that God will speak to you today through James. Well, James, thank you so much for jumping back on the podcast with us today.
Steve, it's my pleasure. It's awesome. It's fun. And like I said, I appreciate you, and just glad you asked me to be back on.
Yeah, no problem. So it's been a few years since we've talked on a podcast, and we've stayed connected over the years and everything, especially through Download Youth Ministry. But I know you have worked with students for many years and have your own podcast called Youth Ministry Soul Keeper. So before we dive into anything else, I thought it'd be fun to share with you. You've probably seen this already because it's been there for a little bit. But one of the reviews that I saw for your podcast, and I think it would help our audience to connect with you just a bit. The title for this review is called "Water to a Weary Soul," and the author of the review says, "I resigned from my role as a youth pastor due to burnout. I have been on the journey of healing and restoration ever since, and Pastor James Sabin's Youth Ministry Soul Keeper podcast has been incredibly life-giving. Whether you're a youth pastor, youth leader, or simply someone who works with students, the wisdom that Pastor James shares will help you to live and minister with longevity and effectiveness." So that, I feel like, is you in a nutshell, and a great review. What as I don't know if you saw that before, but what is your response to just the opportunity that God has given you to speak into youth workers like that?
Yeah, and let me say I'm very grateful my wife posted that. So, so that was I think it's the only review up there, something like that. But it is an honor, and really the truth of it is, when you're in something like burnout, or you name it, any kind of just really hard, dark place, you don't think there is light at the end of the tunnel. You don't think you're going to be able to help again. You don't think you're going to be able to have an impact. And so, those things are always those sweet reminders that God, you can make, beauty from the ashes. You can, there is still hope. There is a getting through. And so, yeah, thank you. And I haven't read that in a long time, obviously, because like you said, it has been on there for a while, and yeah, it blessed me then, and hearing it again is like, yeah, Lord, thank you. That is why, that's why we're here, right?
Yeah,
that's why
absolutely.
we share. So yeah,
absolutely. So let's connect with you just a bit more today. So last time you were on the podcast, it was episode 34, which was in 2018, before,
wow.
The world went crazy with COVID and everything. So we talked a lot about overcoming burnout. Specifically your story of how God really rescued you from that and brought you back to a really good place. And as you said, you weren't in a good place before that, but if you're listening, audience, to this episode, I highly recommend you go back to episode 34 and listen to that, maybe even before continuing with this episode, because I told James, I feel like this needs to be a part 2 to that story today. And so go back, listen to episode 34. But James, it's been a little over 4 years since we talked about that specifically. Give us an update on life in general, like what's been happening over the last few years. What's God been doing in your life over the last couple of years since we talked on the last podcast?
Yeah, I mean, really, I would say since 2018, there really is in my life an established rhythm of life, of ministry, of my family life. And rhythm is it. Before, it was about to-do lists. It was structured, maybe a little too structured, cared more about the structure, right? Couldn't necessarily fully be present because there was so much to do, right? And learning, and I don't know if that just comes, just to be honest, I think it's just, there's developmental milestones. I'm a teacher by trade, and you learn about, the physiological milestones that we almost go through, and I think that's true spiritually. I think as we're maturing, some of it just comes over time. You can't fast forward, right? You can't microwave it. And so I think a little bit has to do with it as well. But yeah, just learning to really be present, to know that, there really is no interruption when God truly is sovereign, and so amongst our, people's free will, God is sovereign. He's still, allowing and moving the pieces around the board, so to speak. And to know that, these moments are opportunities. And so, it keeps you from getting frustrated unnecessarily. It keeps you from losing focus. Like, this is a distraction. I needed to do other things, and not realizing, no, this distraction, this person, this whatever has come in my way, for better or for worse, is the ministry. It's always how we handle those things. And so that, I would say, is probably a huge lesson in that, because as you settle down and you slow down, you begin to realize and see clearer. It's kind of like, I picture it like, when you drive, I don't know if I shared this last podcast or not, so forgive me if this is redundant, but you ever notice when you're driving down a highway, you don't really get to see with clarity, do you? If you look to the right, everything's just a blur. And I was doing ministry like that for a long time, and I think a lot of us do ministry like that. And so you don't take time, but you ever walk along a highway, right? And you can see everything. You can see everything for what it is. And as I walk, I would call it walking now through ministry and life. You get to see Jesus in those moments of, man, I can't believe that happened. And instead of, wondering, how did it happen? Why did it happen? How can I keep it from happening? Right? Whatever that trial or hardship is, it's more like, no, it happened. God, you're present. You're in it. You knew it would happen. How do I respond to it? And that is a totally different mindset than I had. And then listen, and don't because you hear me saying it doesn't mean I walk in it perfectly, right? I don't, but there's a greater awareness of it now than really there probably ever was, right? Does that even make sense? Kind of.
Totally.
So I think I think that rhythm, that contemplative lifestyle has allowed me to see God more in the midst of really daily life. And I know I've said that, like before Burnout, I would have said, oh, sure, I do that. But until you actually do it, and sadly it's burnout, or it's the hardships and the trials and the crises that cause us and force us to, you realize, oh, I really wasn't. So,
Yeah. And you've been, just a quick update, you've been at your current church for 13 years. Is that correct?
Going on 13 years.
13 years.
Love it here. It's a great church.
And you're in Virginia, correct? So
West Virginia, but
West
that's
Virginia.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know West Virginia was a state. I'm from Jersey until I went there. So listen, it's all good. I promise. Not to my West Virginia friends who listen, but I love it. Listen, I'm a West Virginian now, so I can say that, right? My kids are West Virginians, but sadly I was a East Coaster. We thought that it was East Coast. It was New Jersey, New York, and California. That is all we thought existed in Florida when you wanted to go on vacation. And that was it. So yeah, so sadly, I didn't know I thought it was Western Virginia. So there you go. Sorry, my Virginia friends.
There you go. Well, we have this connection now because, John Denver, who is very famous in Colorado, where I am, wrote about West Virginia. Yes, so I'm saying about it. So it's weirdly one of the songs that I hear the most in Colorado. I'm like, you guys realize it's not about Colorado, right? But anyway.
Yeah, and we sing it. So we're Mountaineers here. So West Virginia Mountaineers. I'm sure most people know that team, that we have very good sports teams here at our university. We're right here in the college town. That's where I went. But every football game, it doesn't matter what sporting event, that's what we sing at the end. So there you go. Nice.
And your own kids are in your ministry now, right?
They have been, 16 and 12.
Yeah.
And so
what's that like?
It like you hear, like I heard before it actually happened, it wakes you up to some of the blind spots in your ministry from a parent's perspective. Things my wife always told me about, but until I experienced them, because she's a lot more compassionate. She's discerning and sensitive, than I am not. And so she'd be like, you probably want to, they should know, and no, you realize, no, life is hard as a parent. Yeah. And so I think I knew that from a theoretical position, but I didn't know from a practical one until I become one. So so it's opened me up to that. And in fact, I just got this book right here. It sits on my desk that I'll be sharing. Is from Orange. I don't know if we would promote them, but anyway, we like Orange too. But what most parents aren't telling you is actually a good resource. That's a plug. I don't know you get them to sponsor you, but actually been reading into that. Going to use that at our kickoff event that we do. But anyway, that's one of the things for sure that I've learned with my kids being in the ministry, and it's just fun. It literally is. When you don't feel like you're leaving them behind anymore. To be honest, I don't feel like I'm leaving them now. They're just with me. And that is really cool. So to be honest, that's probably my favorite thing.
Cool. I'm sure there's other people that are listening that do have their own kids in their ministry. Maybe their spouse also serves. So what is that like, especially when boundaries, thinking of burnout, has that been an issue that you've had to think through at all now that like there's those blurred lines between home and ministry, or how has that played into it, all that, I guess?
No, because I would say the biggest issue was ministering with guilt at times, right? Because I was leaving my family. So now when I leave, I'm not really leaving. Tanya now, it's cool because she's got, she likes being with us, which is good. My wife likes to be with me and my kids. And so, and so obviously the kids, but it's nice that she wants to be with me too. Right. And so, and so she'll come now, where before she would be home with the kids, right? Or she'd be home with one of the kids, right? Or she'd drop off my son, and then my other little, or my little one would come, because how that is, kids hang around. My little one's always been in the youth ministry, really. Sure. Right? Even Jacob was before, my oldest before, how that works. But it's nice that when they're apart now, she actually, she comes to things now, and she just attends herself now, instead of taking that time and some nights she's just like, hey, listen, I'm going to enjoy my time. Sure. Which is absolutely understandable. We're just ministering as a family. And to be honest, I love it. And so, before, even though you shouldn't feel guilty, you knew you were called, you still had a little bit of that, whatever you want to call it, youth pastor guilt or whatever, father guilt that I'm leaving my wife, husband guilt. Because, it requires a lot of us. It requires our time. Yeah. And no matter who's ministering, right? Husband, wife, it doesn't matter. They're stepping away from their families. And there's always a cost there. So with understanding. So anyway,
yeah, that's cool that you're able to have like family nights, and that's so awesome.
And it's cool. Yep.
Yeah. So when you were back on the last the episode, again, it's episode 34, you talked a lot about the importance of putting God back at the center of your life and where he really belongs, making sure that priorities are in the right place. Rhythm, you talked about rhythm as well. One of the big things that I took that you talked about is this regular Sabbath that the Bible instructs us to take, but also having a different kind of mindset around Sabbath. And it's actually impacted me over the last several years of how I look toward those days off, and what am I doing those times. Before, I think I had this legalistic kind of mindset of it has to look like this, but it never really did it for me. I wasn't looking forward to it. but since talking to you, actually, that's helped me approach those days in a different way, with excitement, taking God with me in whatever I'm doing those times that are fulfilling and stuff like that. So yeah, how is that approach? I know you briefly talked about it earlier, but how is that approach now that you've been living in that? How has that changed your life and your ministry?
No, I love that. I love that encouraged you. Actually, thank you for sharing that. That really encourages me. Thank you. Wow, that's cool to hear. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm just kind of obviously still doing it. Like I don't think it's changed much. I think I would say I would be, because you know how it works. If you experience something, you have a little bit of a kickback.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I listened back to that podcast, I was probably a little strong than I probably like to be. Does that make sense? I was probably a little dogmatic about the Sabbath, only because it had hurt. I realized, as a kickback emotionally, just how not taking one, how it did, it was detrimental in a way. Right. And so maybe I was a little, I think maybe, I don't know, maybe I didn't come across strong. I felt like I did. Does that make sense? Right. So maybe I didn't, maybe you guys, it doesn't sound like you thought I came across strong or dogmatic, and that's fine. That's good. No. But the way I communicate now is, I would say, after really, I would say about 5 years of really walking a consistent Sabbath, is, I'm not going to be dogmatic on it, but I am going to say, man, I implore you, I was like, you really do need to think about Sabbath. If the way you're living your ministry life and rhythm now isn't working, well, then it's not going to work if you continue. So, and I think Sabbath is the first thing you need to look at. And actually, maybe not first, but as far as like you said, I think if, remembering that we work and we minister out of love of Jesus. And so I'm going to prime this by saying, really, the foundation of this is this: when Jesus was calling Peter to minister, right, when he was telling him to get ready for ministry, they're sitting there, by the Sea of Galilee, and this is kind of, and Jesus is reinstating Peter. He says the foundation of Peter's ministry is to be love of him, not love of the ministry, not love of the people. And he says, so Peter, do you love me? And he says, yes. And then he says, okay, from there, Peter, from that foundation, from that confession, feed my sheep, right? And then he says, do you love me? Right. And then he says, feed my lambs. And then he says, tend my sheep. And then he says, feed, Anyway, you get it. Yep. I think it's 10 feet. Yeah. From that though, each answer is, do you love me? Then minister. Do you love me? Then you minister. Right. And so, and I love that he meets us, and I love that he meets us where we are. Because he didn't have Peter, because we know, everyone knows the Greek, everyone knows the agape phileo dynamic that's happening there. And if you don't, you can Google it; it'll come up. It's easy, right? It's easy to see. And Peter can never really say, "I'm at that place of agape with you yet, Jesus." Right? This is the beginning of my journey in ministry and my walk with you, and my following you for only a handful, couple of years or so. And Jesus says, "That's okay. I'm still calling you to minister with me." And then Peter eventually, we know, would get to that agape, right? And so I love that. And so I would say that's the foundation. So getting back to our first love, to be like Mary, right? He says one thing is necessary, and I did share this in the last podcast, no doubt. Is what? And she's doing it, right? To sit at the feet, right? That Jesus, when he's challenging the churches, right? So he says to Ephesus, "You've forgotten." I think I shared that at DIM too, that part, when we had that talk. And so you've forgotten your first love, and so that's where all ministry comes from. And so, because now listen, you can have that and you can take a Sabbath religiously, right? But again, it not be a Sabbath, right? Because you tried that. And I've tried a Sabbath before. It didn't work, because we thought we were trying something practical, not relational.
Yep.
And so it always comes from this relationship. So everything we do in ministry is relationship with Christ based, is joining Jesus in what he's doing. And he's just asking us to be with him the same way he has the disciples. Like, we always think it's about what we can do for Jesus. He's calling us to do something. And yes, but first he's calling us to be with him. And that's what it says. He said he chose the 12 to be with him. And so really all of ministry comes from that place. And when I got to that place, because really ministry had become for me, not so much, do you love me? Well, yeah, I love you, but I also love this. Right. And my identity, yeah, I know I'm a child of God, but I'm also a pastor. And I know, and I really need, and so I was, this is, that's when my passion, right, was becoming displaced, right, as they say, and so Jesus was kind of losing out to the actual ministry in my heart, and so really that has to be taken care of first. Yeah. But I still wouldn't say don't do a Sabbath. I would say a Sabbath will help you move toward that direction, toward Messiah, right? Does that make sense too? Totally. So one is foundational, but one is absolutely necessary too. And Sabbath does that. It breaks time away. It's like date night with your wife, so to speak, if I can, it's intentional, focused, one-on-one. And as Doug would say, knee to knee, eye to eye with Jesus. And in all of our doings, it's like, hey, it's fun when, you don't know if you, but you have kids, you can take your kids with you throughout the day. Well, that's fun. And that builds relationship. And that's what Sabbath is like. You just kind of we're just taking, and really, it's really let Jesus take us through the day.
Yeah.
Let him set the priority for Sabbath. And I promise you, we're afraid because we think if he sets the priority, it's just going to be us sitting like monks. It's just saying, just sitting there meditating on scripture all day. Right.
Yep.
And so, and I promise you, that's not his picture of Sabbath. He walked through the grain fields. He still hung out with people. He was social. He ministered. Right. You see, and so that is the picture of Sabbath. And like, Lord, what are we doing today? And man, if golf comes up, go golfing. If tennis comes up, go tennis. If walking and taking a hike, if watching that movie you wanted to watch, you know what I mean? We'll go watch the movie. You know what I mean? Like, and that has been transformational. That kind of Sabbath. So that it is exciting. I love what you said about the Sabbath. It became exciting. Where before it was duty. Yeah. And now it was a delight. Like that was so cool, And I'm not going to lie. There are days like, okay, so after practicing it for so long, I would say on a consistent basis, are there some days I feel like, well, that wasn't a great Sabbath. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's okay. There's grace for that. And that's the other thing you learn. There's grace where before I was rigid with myself and not gracious with myself. When you sit with the gracious one, man, you learn to be gracious with yourself and others. And it's just really cool. So anyway, I would say Sabbath is still important. Practice it. There are aspects, principles. I think they can listen to the last podcast to get more of that, but really the heart behind it now is what I would, like you said, I love what you said, Steve, was perfect. Like how Jesus is with you in all of it. And it's just like this delight. And like rest, the Sabbath is for us. Like Jesus, like, this is for you. It's good. And we're like, and he delights in that. Like I delight in a day for my kids. This is for you. Have fun. I want to watch you have fun and delight. Yeah. That's life-giving for everyone. So Absolutely. Anyway, I don't know what that's worth, but
yeah, that's good. That's good. I know, like, over the last, I think since my time in Colorado, but really, really in the last 3 or so years, probably right before COVID, God's been teaching me a lot more in this area. And I feel like the big thing that he's been really honing into me is how to actually rest. I feel like I was running most of my life, and my personality, I'm okay with that. But I think I finally, after conversations with you and some other people that were just speaking wisdom into my life, I realized one of the areas that I was really lacking in, that I didn't know nearly as much as I should, was the idea of rest. And I didn't know how I rested well. I didn't know how to actually, find that rest for myself. And so I started trying new things over the last several years to what works. And one of the things that I did was actually the same weekend that that COVID hit the majority of the world and everything shut down. That Wednesday, I took off for a personal retreat. First time I'd ever done something like that for myself. Did a 3-day retreat, got away from everyone. That's
really good.
Some really cool hookup, and was able to go to a Christian camp, and it was just me and the facilities people there, and out of cell phone range, all this stuff. And before I get into the spiritual stuff, it was really funny because I also decided I was going to fast during this time, and I did not prepare for it whatsoever. And so I got a horrible migraine. I go back into town to get some medicine, and all of a sudden my phone gets within cell phone range. It starts blowing up with text messages and phone calls from the rest of the staff at the church going, I don't know if we're going to have church tonight. I don't know if we're going to have church this weekend. We got to figure out youth group. COVID's shutting everything down. The whole, I was like, wow, I step away for 1 minute.
Right. Yes. I know that's yes.
But so that weekend, I know, like, I wasn't sure how to approach it in the very beginning. I was a little more dogmatic and legalistic about it. It was like, oh, I need to read my Bible so much while I'm here. I need to pray so much while I'm here. And as a youth pastor, I felt weird saying it, but it was like, I was bored and I was not enjoying it. And I was like, okay, what is going on here? but I pushed through and things that you've told me about just taking God into this and bringing him alongside and having fun. And it was weird. About halfway through the time, all of a sudden things just started clicking.
Yeah.
And I started really enjoying myself. And I was like, at the beginning, I texted my wife and I was like, I may come home early. This is not working. But then by the end of it, I texted her and said, I may be up here a few more hours than I thought.
Yeah.
Because it was so good. And I realized how to like just rest and be with God for a time. So that's just one thing that I've learned since then.
That's huge.
What are some things that you've been continuing to learn that God is continuing to teach you about burnout, how to avoid it, how to rest and things like that?
A weekly rhythm is super important. And I am rigid about that. Of course, there's exceptions, right? Recognizing the distractions. Like I said, I can't speak about the sovereignty of God, right? And then the rigidity of our schedule, right?
Yep.
But just know there's a tension that has to live in those things, right? And so just being able to be, comfortable with, there are going to be things that come up within God's sovereignty that I'm living within my control, so to speak, of, I have a schedule. It's set here. I say no to these things. I know these blocks of time are set, where things can invade. And then if things naturally occur, right? The intangibles that happen in our schedules, right? We need to make room for that. And I still live off the Carey Nieuwhof schedule that he created. That, if you're not familiar, check out his website. I literally have a block schedule, just like I literally copied his from his program. And I've been using that ever since. And it stays right there. I'm looking at it on my whiteboard right now. Everyone in the church knows it. They know, call James now, don't call James. And of course, if it's an emergency, then of course I'm open, right? We have to be there. That's what we do. So I would say that is still very important. Like knowing that keeps me afloat spiritually, emotionally, physically. Exercise is important. Like again, this is God created a spirit, soul, and body, and within our range. I know some people have, some people physically have limitations. Whatever you can do for spirit, mind, and body, and that's what we do, and we kind of live in that. And so, but rhythm for me has been the hugest part, and sticking to it, right, and being rigid with flexibility. But rigid on the things we need to be rigid with. Like I know these blocks of time for time with Jesus. These are non-negotiables. Like we have to have a couple non-negotiables, and then the rest can be negotiable, right? And so, but these are my non-negotiables: time with Jesus, time that I have dedicated to ministry, and then and obviously time with family. And these things are totally, and that wasn't in any order, obviously, but these things are these are non-negotiables, and except for of course extreme special circumstances, which is a no-brainer for everybody. But what happens is we start to create, if we don't have good boundaries and we don't have a good understanding of our calling, right, and a good understanding of our roles and stuff, then everything becomes an emergency. And that's the problem, right? And that's the thing. So when we understand this is my true calling, and again, Carey Nieuwhof and a lot of others talk all about that, right? When we understand, oh, this is like, is it really an emergency? Like, will someone really like eternally, if we don't take care of this, if we hold off on this email, if we don't take this phone call, like everyone's emergency isn't my emergency. Like, would they really, like, they usually find out when you start to say no to those things, they weren't emergencies,
right?
Because emergencies are emergencies: death, dying, and bleeding. That's what we say here. That's our kind of our motto here, right? And so, and if it's not, it's, hey, I can't now, but tomorrow morning, or we can. You make time that way, then And so, just those things. But like I said, rhythm and a strong schedule is literally half the battle. But that comes from knowing your call. That means knowing your, what am I really called to? Who am I really called to? Right. And then, okay, and how do I, and then what are the obligations then in meeting that, whether that's ministry, my family, right, my personal life, my walk with Jesus, and then everything else is up in the air from that point. And that's, and like I said, and Carey, to be honest, he's probably one of the more practical ones that if you take his courses, you will be able to go through that and have that down. So so go to that resource, his resources, and I'm sure others know more and they can post it on the podcast, but he's the one that I leaned on.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. His stuff is so great, for sure. And I love that we do have some leaders, especially like Carey Nieuwhof, who have that platform, and he's being very transparent about what he struggled through as well, and being able to help so many of us and hopefully rescue us before we get to that point.
Facts.
Yeah. So, I know one of the things, I mean, you're talking about the rhythm and the importance of things. I've just noticed recently, and something I'm trying to work through as well, as simple as not taking every text message and phone call as they come into that I have to respond right away. Like, that's just the world we live in nowadays. It didn't happen 20 years ago. Like,
Nope.
people just got a hold of us when they got a hold of us, and it was no big deal. But we
Yeah.
just immediately think like, oh, something comes through, we have to respond to it right now, no matter what we're doing. And that is not the case. And I'm trying to get that through my thick head, it's a work in progress, but it's something simple, but so profound. I think if we can get that kind of a rhythm in place that, hey, it's okay. You don't have to respond to everything immediately when it comes through.
Yeah. And Carrie was a big part of that too. I know even, and like, you'll know, my family will tell you at like 9:30 some night, like my phone goes down. I don't even bring it upstairs most of the time. It stays downstairs. If it's a real emergency, they will call my wife. She keeps her phone near the bed. You know what I mean? And so it's good, right? So I know they know the people who need to know, they know her number. And if it's a real emergency, we'll get it, right? But yeah, I mean, that's, and it's funny, you actually can train the people around, like, you know, I'm not saying it like that, like they're animals, but you know, it's true. People will learn your rhythm. People will learn your boundaries, and it's so better for them. And I will tell you, when I've ministered, and I'm just going to be practical here, real, that I've learned for sure. Cause I thought that was really hard to do, but I got to answer them now. They're going to think I don't care. If I don't, they're going to think I'm not, you know, I think it's hard to say, cause it sounds like, you know, this is coming from a place of like, patting myself on the back, but it's just literally a place of really experiencing it. When I lived that way, I was very rarely present for the people who I really were called to minister to. But now, when I know that everything's not an emergency, it's funny when the people sit across from me, you know, in the chairs that I have right here, and we talk, I am present. I'm there. The phone is to the side because I'm used to not answering it. I know when it doesn't buzz. You know what I mean? And because I have the energy, because I wasn't up to answering texts or answering the emergencies or the so-called emergencies all night, that I have, you know, and from a practical standpoint, I have energy. I'm able to be present, so the actual in-person encounters are so much more fruitful. And they actually feel loved. And they've said it to me. Where before, I very rarely heard this comment. I feel like you listen to me when I talk. Let me tell you something. The people who know James from 6 years ago, and even those who get around me, can know I can have that potential because I can get quick and excited and fast. And I'm sure you see that, and off task because I have ADHD to the 10th power. And you know, but I have become truly, and everyone around me, my family will tell us, my wife, I've become such a better listener through this whole process. And they will tell you, man, you may not answer my text messages, but I don't need you to, because when I'm with you, I feel heard and like I matter. And I can't tell you in the last 4 years, Steve, how many times I just heard it. I was just with someone, one of our leaders. She might listen to this. Some of them do. I was just with one, and she said, I like my conversations with you because you listen.
Wow. That's awesome.
I promise you that never happened. She just said it today. I can't make that up. And again, it sounds like but I'm just telling you, I say that because that never happened before. At all. Ask my wife. She would not say that about me. Seriously. And in more recent years, she has said, wow, you are a better listener. And, you know, and again, I think it's just because we're not in crisis mode. You can't minister from crisis mode. And this phone keeps us in crisis mode. Even though we might not have the anxiety feeling, we are distracted and we are moving and doing. And I always say to my kids, it's good to be bored. I promise you, it is good to be bored, you know, and we weren't made to have all this information. I don't watch news. I'm not again, everything I'm saying, I'm not dogmatic about. I promise you, people got to be them in Jesus. Literally, like we're all unique. Right. But for me, like, man, I don't watch news. Like there's just I've got to just there's too much we got going on. You know, I'm aware of news because plus there are people in my life who tell me what's going on. But you know, they tell us, they keep us updated. But
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, but for me, it's like, no, that like really the phone is probably the ultimate distraction we possess. And to just be able to put it down and be like, no, I'm going to watch a show with my wife, or we're going to hang out with our neighbors. Cause we do that, you know, in the summertime and springtime and fall. And I'm just going to go, whatever, just go me and my son are going to walk 4 holes on the golf course or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and that's just what we're going to do. And I'm going to not take the text, and I'll look sometimes, we look and we go, okay, not emergency, not emergency, not emergency. Okay. I'll get back to it tomorrow. That's right. That's it. Right. And even when people say I have an emergency, they'll say that. Then I'll look at what the emergency is and I'll say, it's not an emergency. And I'll just keep moving. And so, and you get better at that and you realize it's not detrimental.
Yeah.
And for the people who can't figure it out right away, if they stick around, they will, because they'll experience, really, I believe we help incarnate Jesus, because that's how he was. And I think that's where Jesus is incarnated, because he was a listener. He was present. People felt seen and heard, and people can't feel that way if we can't even see ourselves. If we don't have room to see ourselves and let ourselves be seen by Jesus and heard by Jesus, there's no way we're going to be able to give that to someone else. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think that's so not only important for us and our families and the people that we are interacting with all the time, but as youth pastors and youth leaders, like we need to set the example for our students. And if we're like, we would seem very hypocritical if we're all the time saying, hey, get off your phones, hey, pay attention to the people around you, but then we're not doing that ourselves. So we need to lead by example for sure, and figure that out for ourselves before we can expect others to follow that example and do it as well. So that's huge. So James, I know you've shared so much encouragement today, so much wisdom, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk more to those in our audience who maybe don't feel as connected. They're trying maybe to put Jesus at the center of the relationship, but maybe they don't feel connected. Maybe they feel a little alone in ministry. They don't feel seen, maybe within their church or outside their church, especially when thinking of burnout and the need to have other people in our lives. What encouragement would you have for those youth workers who are out there listening that want to stick in for the long haul, but do feel a lack of connection?
Yeah, I say this all the time to people that I'm counseling, and it's usually a lack of community, right? A lack of connection, where their real lack is, where their struggle is. And I always say Jesus, and I say this carefully, but you'll get it. I say Jesus is not enough. Jesus is not enough, because we were made in the triune image of God, which is a communal God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? Interdependent on one another, right? Always mutually encouraging, mutually sacrificing, mutually edifying one another, all that stuff. And so we were made in that image. So whenever we separate ourselves, when we disconnect from relationship connection, right, we can no longer reflect the image of God. We're no longer image bearers. And so that comes and so, I know when I went through my burnout, I was very connected. I still had my own pastor was one of my best friends. He had gone through burnout. I was very fortunate situation where I had understanding friends in the ministry while it was happening, who gave me room, who gave me, margin to process, to hurt, to cry, to grow, right? To you name it, to go through it. I still have 2 very close friends outside my own ministry who I've been friends with for over 20 years. We're pastors. We're very close. Process with them. My wife, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, you need community. And I was fortunate that I come into this place and I had that community before I got here, because the senior pastor, I was already friends before I got here. That's a fortunate situation. Praise God. And we've 13 years. So the friendship is still good. So that's good. That could be tricky. But I've also developed 1 or 2 other friendships here through that time. And I don't know how people do it in a place where there's a lot of turnover. I really think that's a hard, man, we know a lot of guys who they're in these churches where there's just a ton of turnover. And I don't know how you do it, because most people travel, like they get a new job and they got to go. So now you go to a place, you don't have friends. At that time, the only thing that'll hold you is long distance connections and like staying. And now with this, I mean, look, we're looking at each other face to face, and so, I mean, you can get through it with someone like this. I believe that, right here, if I just had you, Steve, and, you're in Denver, you're in Colorado and I'm here in Morgantown, West Virginia, we're mountain men, we can connect, and we could, this could make it right here. This could be enough, but yeah, Jesus isn't enough. We were made for community, and Jesus and community is it. It's not just community without Jesus. That's not going to work. And it's not just Jesus, like, just because me and Jesus are enough. No, he didn't create us for that. Remember, he said it's not good for man to be alone. But remember, man had God already.
Mm.
Why was it still not good? He had the
Yeah.
triune God. He had everything
Yep.
he needed. No,
Yeah.
that's not how God created it.
Mm.
God created us to reflect the triune, his perfect triune image. So of course it can't work because we weren't made it for it to work that way. It literally is going against God's creative order. So it's impossible. And so people's issues, all of our issues are always in either disconnect from love of God, right? Relationship with God, and disconnect of love of neighbor, relationship with others. Right? Those are great commands. They're all built around that, right? So that's what I would say. I don't care what you have to do. The same way you would fight for your relationship with Jesus, the same way you would be intentional and make time and sacrifice. I'm telling you, that's uncomfortable. It is just as uncomfortable, I know, for some people to make those connections, because it's easy to be vulnerable with Jesus, I think, for pastors. Right. Yep. But man, and listen, here's the other thing. I would say it's okay to find those one or two trustworthy people in there. And listen, I will say it's in your church. I will say those people are in your church too. It's okay to share your stuff with safe people in your church. And listen, that might come back to bite you. But did it really? If you were being Christ and vulnerable and open, Jesus said to the disciples, couldn't you just pray with me? I need you. I need you. Yeah. I'm reading a book by Henry Now and Reflection. Well, I've read it. It's on my third reading. Whenever I just need to go back to the basis, it's a great book. Reflections on Christian Leadership by Henry Now and In the Name of Jesus. Highly recommend it. Read it. He talks about that too. He talks about if we can't be vulnerable with the very people we're called to minister to, I mean, that's the ministry. Yeah. That is the ministry. Now, you don't just do that. You don't do that from the pulpit. You don't do that. We're youth leaders here, right? So, but and yes, maybe your senior pastor not always safe, but there's got to be someone in your community that's safe. Yeah. I don't think God would call you there if there weren't. Yeah. Right. God's gone ahead of us already. So that might be a little mystical and spiritual, but I believe it's true. Yeah. He's either God or he isn't. Right. So he's done the work already. He's gone before us. He's always at work. And so I have those people here in the midst. I share some rough stuff with people who are people I minister to. Yeah. And if that ever came back to, that they know I love them, and I shared, and I'll just say, I was just trying to be like Christ as best as I could. And if that's a fault, that's okay. So and they're safe for people for certain things, obviously. Right. I mean, we get it. You can't but I think you can, if you've got some people around, even in your own church, I think try both. You definitely need someone on the outside, and I had both, and you need people on the inside. And I think God's got both of those for you.
That's good. Yeah. I've recently found a couple of our volunteers, but they're also parents of some students in our ministry that I've recently connected with, and I've tried to open up just a little more and try to find those appropriate boundaries. But what I've realized is the appreciation others have for me when I open up and I share some of those struggles with them, like it's strengthened our relationship as well. And they feel comfortable talking about that stuff with me. And it's, so if we can appropriately to find those people, man, I think both sides of the party will be richly blessed from that relationship.
Yeah. Paul called that mutual edification, right? As we both minister. I mean, Paul was very vulnerable. You read his letters. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. Like, it's okay to put, and it was a risk. And you know what? Some of it backfired. Some of you don't even like me. He talked all about that. You got Apollos. Some of you think I'm all hot air, right? It's okay. That's good. That's part of the gig. Jesus was misunderstood. We're not called to be understood. We're called to minister and to understand. Yep. And so as long as we're understood by Jesus, he's enough in that area. Yep. Right. And so, I mean, and that's where, and that's hard. Like I said, that came out really easy.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I just say, there you go. Just do it. Yeah, just suck it up. Come on, let's go. But that is not, it is hard. It is a struggle, and it's rough, but man, his grace is enough, and it's sufficient, and you can get through it. And I think sometimes it's easy to quit. It's easier to quit when you're alone. It's easier because there's no consequence. It feels like there's always consequences, right? On this side of heaven and on and eternally. But it feels like there's not, I won't be missed or whatever, right? Or, that was a problem anyway, or whoever that, and so we run. But I think we're really called to persevere, to suffer long with one another, to bear, as Paul said, bear with one another. That's the call, not to get out, not to quit quick, And so, and just, so like I said, that, man, it's longevity happens in community, Jesus and, and so Jesus isn't enough. Community is not enough, but Jesus and community, you will find great grace in that context.
So good. Well, thank you so much, James, for being on again on the podcast today. I'm sure many of our audience is going to want to connect with you and ask you more questions, follow, find your podcast and listen to that. Where can people find you online?
I actually have not done a lot of social media lately. I'm probably going to keep staying away. I apologize, but I think it's James Sabin 13, right, on Instagram. I know you're right, so they can find me there. I actually have a Youth Ministry Soul Keeper Instagram too that I have. I am on Facebook as well. If you just look up, I think James Sabin, and the Youth Ministry Soul Keeper podcast is there as well. But you can find the podcast anywhere, also. And but that's kind of, I'm not online a lot. My wife is. I think my wife, she keeps the family online, which is great. So that's her zone, and she tells me what's going on. Like, Steve, she's even said, "Hey, you know what happened with Steve?" You know what I mean? Like, so she calls. So it's never been me. It's been my wife. She keeps me updated on what's going on with everyone in our youth ministry family and beyond. So, but love to connect with people. If you reach out to me, I will absolutely reach back. And if you reach out on Facebook, my wife will tell me that you reached out, and I will reach back. And so through that,
that's awesome. Yeah, and I think that's part of being wise around avoiding burnout and all that stuff. Is it's been you've had to make that hard decision, but it's been really good for you. And so glad that people can still connect with you, but
they can.
But you don't have to be everywhere.
It's just limited.
Doing everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yep, it's just limited. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I enjoy the headspace. I will tell you that. I don't think I can go back. And it's funny. I will say this, if I can add one more thing. It's amazing when you've after you've lived in that, it's kind of like what you said when you went on your retreat, right? And then when you got to the place of, oh, wow, like this is what it feels like. You were able to, right? And so now you have a sensitivity there. You actually have a filter that you can work off of. And so I never had that before burnout, but now that I have, you feel it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you feel when you're getting fatigued, you feel when anxiety's starting. Like I never had that. I thought that was normal. I thought that was just adrenaline. You know what I mean? Which it was, but then some, right? And so I thought that was the way you're supposed to be. And until you kind of get on the other side, you go, oh no. And so same thing through social media. I was like, nope, I'm not, I can't, that's just, and again, I'm not saying that I'm not being dogmatic, but I think you have to break away from it for a little while so you can create, that awareness, because otherwise you're just in it and you don't know it. So anyway.
Yep, totally. Yeah. Well, James, thank you so much again for being a guest again on the podcast, and may God bless all that you're doing for his kingdom, especially in the world of student ministry, both within your own church and what you're doing for the other youth pastors.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And love being on here, bud. Thanks.
Well, I hope that was just as much of a blessing for you as it was for me, maybe even more. I love talking with James. I always walk away so blessed and so refreshed from my conversations with him. So be sure to connect with him. Be sure to check out his podcast. All those links are going to be in the show notes. And speaking of our show notes, you're also going to find a link to the sponsor of this episode, G-Shades. That's GSHADES.org. And be sure to use the promo code connection to save $20 off your order. Thank you so much, G-Shades, for sponsoring this episode. Also, many of you might be excited to hear again that Mike Haynes from G-Shades is going to be back on the podcast pretty soon, so make sure you stay subscribed. Also, I mentioned this on the last episode, but those of you that are in your first few years of ministry, I want to let you know about the First Few Years in Youth Ministry conference that Download Youth Ministry is putting on October 17th through the 19th. So if you listen to this quickly, maybe you can still get signed up. That's October 17th through the 19th, 2022. If you'd like to know more about that event, check out the episode 81 with Josh Griffin. I'm planning on being there to help out, and I would love to meet you in person if you attend. And if today's episode was helpful for you, I just would encourage you to share it with someone else in ministry who also needs to hear it. And you can also connect with us on social media. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, make sure you connect with us in all those different places. All those links are going to be in the show notes. And if you do enjoy this podcast, be sure to leave us a positive review on your favorite podcast app if it allows for it. I know Apple Podcast and Spotify allow for it. And if another podcast app that you use allows you to leave a positive review, please do so if you enjoy it. It just helps us to continue to bring amazing guests your way and keep doing this. Thank you all once again for being here today. Remember to stay connected, and may God bless your ministry.